Picture this scenario. You're scrolling through your banking app at 2 in the morning, and instead of that familiar knot in your stomach when you see your balance, you actually feel proud of what you've built. Your savings account shows a number that 6 months ago seemed absolutely impossible. $10,000. Not because you inherited money or won the lottery, but because you figured out a system that actually works. Most people think saving $10,000 in 6 months requires some kind of financial wizardry or a six-figure salary. They imagine you need to eat nothing but rice and beans for half a year or move back in with your parents. But here's what might surprise you. The people who successfully hit this milestone aren't necessarily the ones making the most money. They're the ones who understand something that most people completely miss about how money actually behaves. My name is John, and I spend way too much time analyzing spending patterns, psychological triggers, and why some people seem to effortlessly build savings while others can't seem to save a single dollar no matter how hard they try. If you're someone who's tired of watching your paycheck disappear into thin air every month, and you want a realistic roadmap to actually build substantial savings, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up changing how you think about money. Now, before we dive into the specific hacks that can get you to $10,000 in 6 months, let me ask you something. When you think about saving money, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Maybe you picture yourself cutting out every small pleasure in your life. Or perhaps you imagine tracking every penny you spend in some complicated spreadsheet system. The truth is, most people approach saving money in ways that are destined to fail from the very beginning. Here's the thing that financial advisors don't always tell you. Saving money isn't really about willpower or discipline, although those things help. It's about understanding the psychology of your own spending habits and then designing a system that works with your brain instead of against it. Think about it this way. If you've ever tried to diet by simply telling yourself to eat less, you know how well that works. You might succeed for a few days, or even you break down and eat everything in a few weeks, but eventually cite because you were fighting against your natural impulses instead of channeling them productively. Money works exactly the same way. The people who successfully save large amounts don't have superhuman self-control. They've just figured out how to make saving feel automatic and painless instead of like a constant battle against their own desires. And once you understand these principles, hitting $10,000 in 6 months becomes not just possible, but almost inevitable. Let's start with something I call the invisible money hack, and this is probably going to sound too simple to actually work. Every single week, you're going to take a specific amount of money and make it disappear from your checking account before you even have a chance to spend it. But here's the key. You're not just moving it to a regular savings account where you can easily access it when you want to buy something. You're making it genuinely invisible to your day-to-day financial life. Most people fail at saving because they treat their savings account like a temporary holding area for money they're planning to spend later. They'll save $500, then use it for a vacation. They'll build up $1,000, then spend it on a new television. This creates a cycle where you're constantly starting over from zero because your brain never learns to live without that money. But when money becomes truly invisible to you, something magical happens in your psychology. Your brain adjusts to living on whatever amount is left over after the invisible money disappears. If you make $4,000 per month and you automatically make $400 invisible every week, your brain starts operating as if you only make $3,600 per month. This isn't deprivation, this is adaptation. The specific mechanism for making money invisible is crucial, and most people get this part wrong. You can't just transfer money to a savings account at the same bank where you do your regular banking. That money is still visible when you log into your banking app. You need to create genuine separation between your spending money and your saving money. Here's what actually works. Open a high-yield savings account at a completely different bank from where you keep your checking account. Set up an automatic transfer that happens every single Friday for exactly $417. Why Friday? Because weekends are when most people do their discretionary spending, so removing money right before the weekend forces your brain to plan around its absence. Why $417? Because that's exactly what you need to save per week to hit $10,000 in 6 months. And the odd number makes it feel more intentional than a round number like $400. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something that will probably surprise you about human psychology. The amount of money you save is less important than the consistency of when you save it. Your brain is constantly looking for patterns and trying to predict your behavior. When you save different amounts at random times, your brain never fully adjusts because it's always wondering when the next disruption will happen. But when you save the exact same amount at the exact same time every single week, your brain stops fighting the system and starts building your life around it. After about 3 weeks of automatic $417 transfers every Friday, you'll stop even thinking about that money. Your brain will naturally adjust your spending patterns to work within the reduced amount that's left over. This is why people who use this system often report that saving feels effortless after the first month, while people who try to save inconsistent amounts whenever they remember are constantly struggling with their own willpower. Consistency beats intensity when it comes to building savings, and the invisible money hack leverages this psychological principle to make large amounts of saving feel completely natural. Now, let's talk about the expense stacking technique, which is probably the fastest way to free up money for savings without feeling like you're making any sacrifices. Most people approach cutting expenses by looking at their biggest bills and trying to reduce them. They'll try to find cheaper rent, or refinance their car loan, or switch to a less expensive phone plan. And while these strategies can work, they require a lot of effort and research, and the results aren't immediate. Expense stacking works completely differently. Instead of focusing on your biggest expenses, you focus on your smallest recurring charges and eliminate multiple ones simultaneously. The psychological impact of removing 5 small expenses feels much bigger than removing one large expense, even if the dollar amounts are similar. Here's how you actually do this. Pull up your bank statement from last month and highlight every single recurring charge under $30. This includes subscription services, apps, memberships, automatic renewals, and any other small charges that happen regularly. Most people are shocked when they realize how many of these they have. The average person has between 12 and 18 recurring charges under $30 per month. Now comes the crucial part. You're not going to evaluate each charge individually and decide whether it's worth keeping. That decision-making process creates mental fatigue and usually results in keeping most of the subscriptions because each one seems reasonable when considered in isolation. Instead, you're going to cancel everything under $30 and then only resubscribe to the things you genuinely miss after a week without them. This approach flips the decision-making process in your favor. Instead of having to justify why you should cancel something, you have to justify why you should pay for it again. And here's what happens in practice. You'll cancel 15 subscriptions, miss maybe 3 of them, and end up saving $200 to $400 per month without feeling deprived of anything you actually value. The expense stacking technique works because it targets what psychologists call decision fatigue. Every financial choice you make throughout the day uses up a small amount of mental energy. By eliminating multiple small decisions at once, you free up mental bandwidth for bigger financial choices while automatically reducing your spending. But there's another layer to this that most people never discover, and it's what I call the replacement effect. When you eliminate a bunch of small expenses, your brain doesn't just adjust to spending less money, it starts looking for ways to get the same satisfaction you were getting from those canceled subscriptions, but through free or much cheaper alternatives. Maybe you were paying for 3 different streaming services, but now you rediscover your local library's free movie collection. Perhaps you were subscribed to a meal delivery service, but now you start cooking more often and actually enjoy the process. The money you save is just the beginning. You often end up with better habits and more genuine satisfaction than what you were buying. Now let's dive into something that sounds almost too good to be true, but the math works perfectly. The cashback acceleration system. This isn't about becoming one of those people who obsesses over credit card points or spends hours chasing tiny rewards. This is about strategically structuring your existing spending to generate automatic savings without changing what you buy or how much you spend. Here's the foundation. You're already spending money on groceries, gas, utilities, and other necessities. That spending is going to happen regardless of your savings goals. But right now, that money is just leaving your account and providing zero additional value beyond the products and services you're purchasing. The cashback acceleration system changes that dynamic completely. You start by identifying your 3 largest categories of necessary spending. For most people, this is groceries, gas, and recurring bills like utilities or insurance. These categories typically represent about 60% of most people's spending, and they're completely unavoidable expenses. You're not trying to reduce these expenses, you're trying to make them work for you. Next, you get specific credit cards that offer the highest cashback rates for each of these categories. This isn't about accumulating credit cards randomly. You want exactly 3 cards, each optimized for one major spending category. One card that gives you 5% back on groceries, one that gives you 3% back on gas, and one that gives you 2% back on recurring bills. Here's where the acceleration part comes in. Every dollar of cash back you earn gets automatically transferred to your invisible savings account at the end of each month. You never see it, you never spend it, and you never think about it. But over 6 months, if you're spending $800 per month on groceries, $300 per month on gas, and $400 per month on bills, you're generating about $216 in cash back every month. That might not sound like a fortune, but remember, this is money you're earning on spending you were doing anyway. It's completely painless savings that requires zero lifestyle changes once you set up the system. Over 6 months, you're looking at nearly $1,300 in automatic savings just from strategically routing your existing spending. But here's where most people make a critical mistake that undermines the entire system. They treat cash back like free money and spend it on things they wouldn't normally buy. The moment you start thinking of cash back as spending money, you've destroyed the psychological foundation that makes this system work. The cashback has to remain invisible, just like your weekly automatic transfers. This brings us to something I call the spending speed bump technique, and this is where we start getting into the deeper psychology of why most people struggle to save money. The problem isn't that people don't want to save. The problem is that modern spending happens too quickly for your brain to process the long-term consequences. Think about the last time you bought something online. You probably went from wanting the item to owning it in about 30 seconds. Click, click, enter your payment information, confirm purchase. Your brain barely has time to consider whether this is a good financial decision before the transaction is complete. This speed creates what psychologists call temporal discounting, where immediate rewards feel much more valuable than future benefits. The spending speed bump technique deliberately slows down your purchasing decisions to give your rational brain time to catch up with your emotional impulses. But you can't just tell yourself to think more carefully about purchases, because in the moment, every purchase feels justified. You need to build delays into the purchasing process itself. Here's the specific system that works. For any purchase over $50 that isn't a genuine emergency, you have to wait 24 hours before buying it. For purchases over $200, you wait 1 week. For purchases over $500, you wait 1 month. But here's the crucial part. You don't just wait passively. You actively engage with the waiting period. When you want to buy something, you write down exactly what you want, how much it costs, and why you think you need it. Then you set a reminder on your phone for when the waiting period ends. During the waiting period, you're allowed to research the item, read reviews, compare prices, and even visit it in stores if you want. You're not trying to talk yourself out of buying it. You're just giving yourself time to make sure it's really what you want. What happens in practice is fascinating. About 60% of the items you put on your waiting list never get purchased, not because you decide they're too expensive, but because you realize you don't actually want them that much. The initial desire was often triggered by marketing, social pressure, or just temporary emotions rather than genuine need. The remaining 40% of items that you do end up buying tend to be much better choices because you've had time to research them properly. You often find better deals, higher quality alternatives, or discover that you can get the same result with something you already own. The net effect is that you spend dramatically less money while actually being more satisfied with your purchases. The spending speed bump technique works because it breaks the connection between impulse and action. When buying something requires a conscious decision made over multiple days, rather than a split-second impulse, your spending naturally aligns with your actual values and long-term goals. Now let's talk about the income optimization hack, because saving money is only half of the equation for reaching $10,000 in 6 months. Most people focus exclusively on cutting expenses while completely ignoring opportunities to increase their income. But here's what's interesting about human psychology. Increasing your income by $500 per month feels much easier and more exciting than reducing your expenses by the same amount. The key is understanding that you don't need to change careers or start a business to meaningfully increase your income in the short term. You just need to optimize what you're already doing and find small opportunities that most people overlook. Start with your current employer, because this is where you have the most leverage and the fastest path to additional income. Most people assume they need to wait for their annual review to discuss compensation, but that's leaving money on the table for months. Instead, you're going to create what I call a value documentation system. Every single week, write down 3 specific things you accomplished that benefited your company. Not vague statements like, did my job well, but concrete examples with measurable results. Maybe you solved a problem that saved time, helped a difficult customer, or improved a process. After 6 weeks, you'll have 18 documented examples of value you've created beyond your basic job requirements. Here's where it gets strategic. You're not going to ask for a raise based on how long you've been there or how much you need the money. You're going to present a business case showing exactly how much value you've generated. Schedule a meeting with your manager and bring your documentation. The conversation isn't, "I deserve more money." It's, "Here's the measurable value I've been creating, and I'd like to discuss aligning my compensation with my contribution." This approach works because you're speaking the language that managers understand. Instead of putting them in the uncomfortable position of deciding whether you deserve more money, you're showing them data that makes the decision obvious. Even a modest $200 per month increase adds up to $1,200 over 6 months, which is a significant boost to your savings goal. But don't stop there. Look for opportunities to take on additional responsibilities that come with compensation increases. Maybe there's a project that needs a leader, or a skill that your company needs that you could develop quickly. When you position yourself as someone who solves problems, rather than someone who just does their assigned tasks, opportunities tend to appear. The second income stream you should explore is what I call micro-monetization of skills you already have. Most people think they need to learn completely new skills to make extra money, but you probably already possess abilities that other people would pay for. The key is thinking smaller and more immediate than most side hustle advice suggests. Look, saving $10,000 in 6 months isn't about depriving yourself or living like a monk. It's about understanding how your brain actually works with money and building systems that make saving feel automatic instead of painful. The invisible money hack, expense stacking, cashback acceleration, spending speed bumps, and income optimization. These aren't just random tips. They're a complete psychological framework that transforms your relationship with money. 6 months from now, you could be that person checking their banking app with pride instead of anxiety.